In front of stone walls, 2 round trays hold an array of slim, lit candles. Gather we now in this space, this time when the wheel turns and the veil shatters. Gather we now to remember, to grieve, to prophesy, to complete our harvest before the long night comes. Gather we now to tell the old stories and sing the old songs, to be as we have always been, the voice of our people eternal. Gather we now to celebrate that which was, that which is, and that which will be. Gather we now as we have always done, united by story and bound by love.
All right, I invite you to rise, either body or spirit, as we sing this hymn. Those of you online, you have to sing it loud enough so we can hear. So welcome to the, you could go down a little on that, Brian. Welcome to the Unitarian Church. My name is Nathan. I'm one of your ministers. Reverend Chris Long is on your other minister is on a women's volleyball spiritual retreat where he is, this is going to be our test if he's watching the service or not. He's a big fan of University of Wisconsin-Madison's women's volleyball team, and he watched them yesterday, and he's coming home today. He will be joining us again next week. So I wanted to give you kind of a welcome. For those of you who are looking around wondering why some of the either leaders or parents look exhausted, it's because we had a big deal Halloween party last night, and it was a great event, and It was good. See, you get nodding. Those online can't see the nodding from the chancel. A few things for you to know. Today, between the services, we're going to do for adults, a pumpkin sit and chat. Are they just talking about pumpkins? Are there pumpkins that they're going to look at? Or there just happen to be pumpkins in room 1, which is that first room where they're going to be?
Talking is what they're going to do.
They're supposed to talk.
Pumpkin painting is
But there are
optional,
pumpkins to be painted if you would like to paint your pumpkins.
and they're really cool.
Yes, and there's cool pumpkins to be painted. Probably. Possibly. Pumpkin
There are 30
painting.
of them. There are pumpkins to be painted.
Plenty of pumpkins to be painted, probably today. All right. And this goes for teens as well. Can join the pumpkin painting promenade. Also on November 12th, we are doing our... That's a lot of P's, I'm sorry. On November 12th, we're doing our gumbo cook-off and open mic as a celebration of the end of the stewardship drive. And since today is officially the end of the stewardship drive, I'm going to tell you kind of our status, which is it's not over, but from what you're going to hear, it is over. I have good news and bad news and all the news in between. We are still missing about 86 pledges. Well, actually 186, but 100 we know are not going to come in. So 86 pledges that we expect to come in. We have raised $435,000, which is phenomenal. Remember, 3 years ago, $460,000 was the most this church raised. The problem is, for us to make budget, we have to get to $600,000. The excited pledgers are usually the ones who turn in the highest pledges, and they turn them in early. And I don't foresee these 85 families each pledging $2,000 each to make up the gap to make our budget. Last year, we were looking at serious church problems if we didn't make budget. This year, we're looking at moderately inconvenient church problems. So here's where the mix is. You all have given, those who are here are the ones who are giving and who have listened. And those who usually don't give or are just a little more not in the center of the church are the ones who don't hear this message over and over. So we're always kind of stuck in this weird middle. But I just want you to know where we are as a church. We are already at one of the most generous pledge drives ever. And because of a whole series of not very interesting events, we still need more. So that's where we are. In the scope of the world, this is a good place to be. So both feel good and feel like we have more to do. Oh, and to quote a member of the generosity team, those who have not pledged, we're going to keep bugging you until you either tell us to stop asking you or to you turn in your pledge. But that's what you just should know now. Did I hit all the things? I hit all the things. There's a lot of good stuff coming up. Kathy, would you like to tell us the story?
I would be delighted to. So the story this morning is a true story. See if you can find the truth in it that resonates with you today. It's actually two true stories kind of mushed together. They're from our history, from a time called World War II, which I think many people here have a framework for, but I'm telling the story for all ages. And if you're not familiar, World War II was a time of a lot of fear and a lot of war and a lot of people trying to get free or trying to escape. So this story, both of these stories, are about that. So, on a snowy night in Prague, in Czechoslovakia, in 1939, Martha Sharp jumped from a taxi, darted around a corner, and flattened herself into a doorway. The heels of a pursuing Gestapo agent clicked past her. She went into an unlit apartment building, dashed up 5 flights of stairs, and rang the bell. She was at the door of a known anti-Nazi leader, and she called him Mr. X. 6 weeks earlier, Martha Sharp and her husband, Waitstill Sharp, a Unitarian minister, had left their young children at home with parishioners in the United States so that they could volunteer for a relief effort in Czechoslovakia, which was coordinated by the American Unitarian Association. And then while they were there, one night in 1939, the Nazis invaded Czechoslovakia, and suddenly their helping mission had turned into a real cloak and dagger kind of mission. So that March night, a woman opened the apartment door for Martha Sharp. But the woman said, "I've never even heard of the man you're looking for." Martha showed her her American passport. The woman said in Czech, "A moment," and she snatched the passport, went into the room, and closed the door. And Martha Sharp stood there for long minutes, really worried because that passport was her ticket to safety. The door did open. A man stood before her. She explained to him that a group of British and American refugee workers had asked her to get him to the British embassy so he could be smuggled to safety out of the country. He asked her to wait a moment, went inside. When he came back, he was bundled up in an overcoat, handed her back the passport. Together they walked through wind and rain through the dark city. 3 times Gestapo agents challenged them. Each time Martha showed them her American passport, said, "Americans," and they were allowed to go through. The 3rd time the Gestapo agent wanted to argue, and she started going on about there were no taxis, she was late for a meeting, she was supposed to talk to the secretary, and couldn't he just understand? And thankfully, the agent waved her through. And I am telling the story and have totally lost my place. And after that, Mr. X was smuggled safely out of the country. Martha that night returned to her apartment where her husband, Wade Still, had just finished a similar mission, and together they watched the Nazi soldiers through their window, pillaging the stores and the apartments in Prague, Czechoslovakia. So that rescue is just one of hundreds that Reverend Wade Still and Martha Sharp orchestrated. They helped Jews and non-Jews, intellectuals, leaders, writers, artists, children escape to safety from the Nazis. Now, along about the same time, the American Unitarian Association had an arm called the Unitarian Service Committee, and they needed an official-looking symbol to stamp on their papers and their boxes and their trucks. So the picture of a flaming chalice was drawn by a refugee named Hans Deutsch. It showed refugees from many different countries that they were there to help them. So when refugees saw this picture of a chalice, it didn't matter that they didn't understand the words on the document or the boxes or the trucks. They could see the symbol, and they understood that it stood for help. Eventually, that chalice design became the design for the American Unitarian Association's official logo, and when the Unitarians and the Universalists merged in 1961, it became the center of the logo for the new Unitarian Universalist Association, with 2 circles, one for the Unitarians, one for the Universalists. We aren't really sure how that chalice, as a 2-dimensional drawing, turned into the chalice that we use in worship today. And we're pretty sure that the path came through children's religious education, because our curriculum from the 1970s told the story of the chalice and had children in their classes make chalices in various mediums. And then when they would come and lead worship for the adults in the sanctuary, the children brought their chalices and would light a chalice. And sometime in the 1980s, it became really common practice for everyone in Unitarian Universalist congregations to light a chalice on Sunday morning worship, just as we do now. And every time a Unitarian Universalist chalice is lit, people still see it as a symbol. As we say here, it is a symbol of the power of love to transform the world.
A reminder, there were cards to sign in the breezeway. Also, last week we had a coffee emergency, and so some of the cards that you did sign are now more coffee than card, and so those are back to be signed again. So for those of you keeping track, if you signed a card last week, this person is not going through twice as much heartache. They just need a new card. We also have a memorial service this Saturday for a member of the church, M.K. Politz, at 10 o'clock. So just wanted to make sure you were aware and you can be here if you were planning on it. This ritual we have is open to everybody, visitor and member alike. It's open to people online if you would like to type your stone into the chat. We invite those who wish to come forward either along the west or the east wall. Take a stone, let it represent whatever's on your heart, whatever's on your mind. Place it in the chalice bowl. We now invite those who wish to come forward as we place stones. We say together, with hope to make this a better world, we light this flame. Its light is a symbol of the power of love.
I spent some time this weekend with an old friend, a dentist. She's considering buying her own practice, but wonders if she could retain the current patients and attract new ones. She wonders if the office staff would like her, or befriend her too much, or resent her, or desert her. She wonders about bill collecting, spending too much time on crowns and root canals, which she likes, at the expense of oral surgery, which she doesn't. She wonders about being a good wife and mother and all-around person. She's scared. My friend is intelligent, well-organized, energetic, terrific with teeth, but scared. It makes me think we all are. Scared we'll lose the company's big Formica account. Scared we'll miss the time change. Scared we're handling the kids' curfew wrong. Scared our next paycheck won't come in. Scared of our failing health. Scared of everything falling apart. Scared when our child leaves the house. Scared that nobody really loves us. Scared of all the fragility of creation. Scared. Oh, spirit of life and love, we aren't the giants we so much like to be, and the world can loom so large. When all is quiet and we're small and the night is dark, may we hear the tender breathing of all who lie awake with us in fear, that together we may gather strength to live with love and kindness and confidence.
I just want to clarify something real quick. I've asked Leslie to do a bunch of readings. None of them are her. You may have a friend who's a dentist, but this is not her friend who's a dentist. So I just wanted everyone to be clear. There was once I did a reading like years ago that said I was from Pittsburgh, and people said, I didn't know you were from Pittsburgh. So the worship associate is often reading someone else's words. So I have a confession for you all. Every year around this time, you can lower me just a little, Brian. Every year around this time, congregations that are looking for ministers, like we did last year, put up a profile. It's about 100 pages, all about who the church is. And every year I read as many of them as I can, not because I am looking. I am thrilled to be here. I am happy. It could not be in a better spot. I want you to hear that clearly. I read it because it both gives me a better idea of where we are as a faith, and it is like the gawkiest, most fascinating thing. There was like one that spent 3 paragraphs talking about how great their steeple was. So it's steeple, like the thing. Anyway, a couple of years ago, the church in Salem, Massachusetts came available. Now you have to understand that these are pages and pages of documentation on the church's history and its culture and the demographics of the city, and what are the biggest mistake a minister could make if they came, and the 3 things that'll never change, will always change, and everything you could ever imagine. All right. So it turns out the Unitarian Universalist Church in Salem is the first parish church in Salem, Massachusetts. This is the church that existed in Salem for hundreds of years, and yes, this is the church that was at the center of the Salem witch trials. Remember that we are a congregational faith, and over time, congregational theologies evolved to be Unitarian Universalist. This church was squarely Calvinistic and puritanical. In the 1600s, there was no chalice lighting. They didn't have our hymnal back then. And according to the congregational record and some of their history, some of the members of that particular parish were some of the people who were killed by the mob. So that realization that such a violent, fearful part of our nation's history is intimately tied in with our faith. But not just within our faith, with a congregation looking for a minister that could have been any of the clergy that I know going to serve there. By the way, that was a particularly nerdy church, not the people, but there was so much history to study that a really academic minister nerd would thrive there. But it led me to the theme of today's service, which is going to be the kind of Halloween-y theme, which is, what are you afraid of? And how you fear, and how what you fear and how you live out that fear has generational impacts. The question is, what horrors are we unleashing on our world because of untended fears that we have? It is important that we name it, get our fears out and on the table so that we can address them. Towards the end of the service, hopefully you'll understand why I think Halloween is the perfect time for us to do that. It's sort of the theological antidote to a lot of the foolishness we are seeing. I'm going to complain about how people are complaining about the libraries later. But first, I want to give you a list. I want us to spend some time thinking about what you are afraid of. And so I'm going to rattle off my list. Please do not pay attention to my list, nor please do not take notes of my list. It is merely meant to be a prompt, a sort of a droning background noise, which maybe all my sermons are, but that was supposed to be self-deferential. Anyway. But think of this as just a droning background noise to let you click and think about what your fears are. Also, you should know I have a lot of them. You don't have to take care of me with this. I got it. My job as a minister is to be vulnerable with you, but not in a way that you take care of me. Are we good? All right. So I want to start off with a comment that I heard at my very first memorial service that I ever attended as a religious professional. I was a director of religious education in Austin, Texas, and it was the first death that I had experienced. His name was Mark. He had an aneurysm. He was in his 40s. He had 2 young children. He is the first of many church members whose deaths I hold in my heart. The funeral was an open casket, and I had never been to one of those before. And I must have appeared nervous because one of the spiritual leaders in the church came up to me and she said that she read somewhere, which is some pretty ominous, sketchy words. She read somewhere that there are only two fears people experience when they see an open casket. I don't know why this has never left my head, so I guess it has some truth. The first fear is that you will picture yourself in their place. That has never been my fear. I'm not looking forward to death, but I'm not afraid of it, per se. The other fear is that the person will jump up and startle you. I mean, that is... Yep. All right, so who's on the jump up and startle team? 1, 2, all right. So, good. All right. I don't know that those are the only two fears, but I'm using that as the primer. So here we go. A non-comprehensive list of my fears that I, as one of your spiritual leaders, have. I'm afraid of movies or TV shows that have violence that is startling. Also, I'm afraid of movies or TV shows that convince you there's something outside watching you that can kind of get in your brain. Like, I can handle violence, but I can't handle the subconscious sort of stress stuff. I'm afraid of needles. I'm afraid of heights. I'm afraid of big open bodies of water, especially where you can't see the bottom, where there are alligators or sharks or other weird monsters that we haven't discovered yet. Once again, I don't need you to fix this. I have plenty of decades working on these fears. As a kid, I was never afraid of knives or forks because I knew to be afraid of them. But I was very afraid of spoons because they could pop your eye out because they're the right size of your eye, and no one ever tells you to be afraid of spoons. I actually kind of love hurricanes, and I'm afraid of them. I'm afraid of tornadoes. I'm afraid of house fires. I am afraid of quicksand, despite the fact that I don't even know that that exists or is a relevant threat to anyone in this country. I'm not really afraid of someone sneaking a razor blade into my apple, but I understand from watching local news when I was a child that that is something that I was supposed to be afraid of. I am, however, very afraid of opening biscuit rolls where they pop. Anyone else, please? Yes? Those who have that fear, that is, it is the most real fear, right? Yeah. Online people, I assume y'all are all biscuit roll people too. I am not afraid of being killed if I am pulled over by the police. I have enough demographics on my side in a country that has told me the demographics I have will keep me safe. Not everyone has that privilege. I'm not at all afraid of people telling me to smile more or commenting on what I wear. I am rarely afraid that my interactions with people of different genders will result in some sort of violence towards me. While there is a history of sexual violence towards men, it is much smaller than men towards other groups. I am not afraid of ghosts, nor do I believe in them, but I will not spend the night in the house that has belonged to my family for hundreds of years because 5 people have died in that house. I am not afraid of flying, but I'm afraid of the plane crashing into a big open body of water, which is same fear as earlier. I am afraid of this church becoming irrelevant and struggling to exist. I am afraid of Unitarian Universalism undermining itself through its fear of trusting its leaders, through its desire to prove itself superior to others, and through its aligning itself with specific political ideologies. I am afraid of my kids getting hurt. I am afraid of my kids hurting other people. I am afraid of missing the bus when I have to pick up my kid. I am afraid of showing up to work here wearing the wrong shoes, which has happened multiple times. I am not afraid of death, although I don't want it to come anytime soon. I'm not afraid of getting a call in the middle of the night from a church member about a death of a family member. I'm sad and I dread it coming, but I'm not sad because not afraid because it is a sacred, albeit painful time in a family's life, and it is an honor to be a part of that. I used to be afraid of getting COVID and dying, or giving COVID to someone else. I'm not afraid of that anymore. Sit down for this one. I'm not afraid of someone tampering with my food, but I am afraid of biting into a bug that I didn't see when I was eating it. I am afraid of one of you being hurt at this church, either physically or by another church member emotionally or spiritually. I am afraid of what I preach. It is a very scary position to, once again, none of this is I need you to take care of me. This is the drone where you're supposed to be doing your own fear list. I am afraid of what I preach because what we do here is so important. And it's your chance to go deeper into the parts of your life that might be scary, and it is very frightening to know that I can mess that up. I am afraid of us losing the progress we have made in this world in terms of us acknowledging the real humanity of real people who deserve respect. I am afraid of what the people that we as a country have elected are deciding, who the people we have elected have decided to marginalize to try to amass power. So the question is, what are we afraid of? Let's go ahead and rise and we'll sing this next hymn. This is the part you've all been waiting for, the section of the service about yards. Earlier this week, I was meeting with the new director of the Interfaith Federation. He's from Alabama, but he was in Slovakia, I believe, for 10 years or so. And he asked me if the decorations were always so intense for Halloween time in the yards. And I told him it was a new phenomenon. See, in the before times, I could go to the store, I don't know, let's say Costco, that was my skeleton supply warehouse at the time. And I could get a good Halloween skeleton up until about mid-October. October of 2020, all of the houses were decorated by early, if not mid-September, like fully decorated. And I believe very strongly in a 1-month Halloween rule. But gonna let that go. In 2021, the giant 12-foot skeletons showed up. Do y'all know what I'm talking about? Yeah, they're like $300 at Home Depot. Apparently it's like a huge selling thing for them. But this year, I'm seeing all of those, but I'm seeing scarier and scarier decorations showing up. I've lost count of the number of garbage bags that are duct taped to look like a body hanging upside down. You've seen them? Yeah, no, I was riding past my bike past a really kind of fancy, richer neighborhood, and they had ghouls hanging out of windows and stuff. I mean, they're going intense. And all of this makes sense, however. See, we've been living in scary times, and this is how we play with what is scary. So So I understood the decorations in 2020 going up early. We were stuck in our houses. There wasn't much to look at. And the first holiday since the shutdown, I mean, not Easter, but Easter's not like a really good decorating holiday. I mean, it is, I guess, but this was like our first major decorating holiday, so I got it. But this year, Costco started putting up their decorations in July, and they were gone by September. It was full Christmas in there, in contrast to the before times. I don't know why we are so engaged in decorating our houses so frighteningly, but I am guessing it has something to do with how afraid we are as a culture right now. What we do with our yards says a lot about us. How we take care of our homes says a lot about us. It is okay for people to be scared right now, and that is the best that I can do to tie that into the offering. So we're just going to pretend that was smooth. You can go ahead and put up the image. We are sharing, this is the last Sunday of the month, we're sharing it with the Walls Project. This is, we're going to cut everything right down the middle of what we give, half to us, half to the Walls Project. Next month is a whole different organization. So this is your last chance to give to the Walls Project. And I'll ask you to give very generously as this morning's, after this, we're going to have a hymn that you have not heard before, but it's a really pretty hymn, so I want you to know about it. You're even going to hear it during the offering, so just pay attention a little. Now, the morning's offering will be given and received. you all join me in a moment of prayer and reflection? The God that we know when we see love and family and kindness and hope, be with us on this day. And hold all who are fearful, all who are disappointed, all who hope for a better world. Help us to hold a love for this place, not just here, but everywhere. Help us to hold a vision for what a world could be. Help us to know peace. Help us to know love. Amen.
This isn't in the middle of story. So it's for the best if you do not expect a resolution. There are so many resolved stories where the crisis passes and the triumph is clear. Sometimes we need a tale shouted from the whale's belly of worry. When the letter arrived from the state of New Jersey, it had all the markings of official news. We were informed that our 2-week-old infant was tested for a range of medical conditions while he was in the hospital, 57 to be exact. It was mandated by the state. Oh yes, I thought, I do live in a state of regulations. And then came the line, the test needs to be repeated. It was followed by all manner of assurances that nothing was necessarily wrong, but we should, the letter dictated, contact the hospital and our pediatrician immediately. I began catastrophizing. I searched the internet for a list of the 57 conditions. I did everything but call the pediatrician. Seeing my fear of the other shoe dropping syndrome, my spouse called the pediatrician, who informed us that the hospital did the test. In a Shakespeare-worthy plot twist, the hospital informed her that I had to be the one to call to schedule the repeat test. And here we breathe anxiously 2 weeks later. I have yet to call the hospital. I'm not sure of the penalty for breaking the law, but I'm convinced it can be no worse than the potential news. So, this is a story in the middle, sent out to all those in the middlers. For those at the edge with the cheering crowd shouting, "It will be fine." For those in the belly of the whale feeling daylight coming through the blowhole, trying to wind up the courage to burst toward daylight. For those holding a phone, staring at the keypad, trying to promise, "I will," tomorrow. For those wondering how their story ends. But here's a shout of good news from the whale's belly. Fear cannot last forever, not if we let one another in.
One of the things that Congregational Record said about Salem that confused me, so there's a part of the Congregational Record where they list out all the peculiarities of a church, like things about the building that you may need to know. And they said normally you can just park on the street except for in the month of October. And then it didn't say why, it just said talk to the search committee about it, and I thought, what is going on in Massachusetts with street parking in October? Talked to some people and had to have someone explain it to me that Salem was a Halloween destination, which I knew, but I didn't know. How strange is that? Because of the violence and injustice in a city 4 centuries ago, that we attract people to a place at a time in the year when we play with what we were afraid of. And how strange is it that the accusation that resulted in people's murder have become characters that we play with? I'm not talking about Wiccans and witches. I'm talking about the manifestation of it through the vampire werewolf kind of trajectory. What we are afraid of matters. It tells us what we value, and it tells us what we are afraid of losing. But knowing what we are afraid of also matters because it dictates what we do. And this is a section of the service as it relates to theology and fear. It got me thinking about what were they so afraid of back in the 1600s? What is so frightening about women that they needed to be killed? I started going down the rabbit hole of thinking about how maybe it was men seeing the awesome power of childbirth and realizing how irrelevant they were and needing... I didn't mean that as a joke, like I really think. Maybe it was an expression of the uncertainty they felt living in such a frightening place at a frightening time where disease and violence could end your life so quickly. Anxiety and fear, it's a lot like lightning. It's going to find a spot to ground itself. It's just whether you're intentional about where you place it or it's dangerous where it finds a place. There are so many groups that have these untended fears in our culture that I wonder about. So anyway, I went deep down this rabbit hole when my phone rang. It was my mom. She's a retired librarian, and it was about a meeting in Slidell, it's my hometown, this past week about banning books in the public library. It was the exact same foolishness that has happened in Livingston a couple of months ago and happened in Lafayette earlier in the year. I know the minister's job is not to be dismissive, but the most respectful term I can come up with for this is foolishness. All 3 of these book banning conversations contained many of the same narratives, many of the same talking points, many of the same books and images, many of the same images from many of those same books. There is a new, dangerous, and not very well thought out fear narrative that is being pushed against gay and trans people. And the narrative says that they are grooming children to be gay and to be trans, and intentionally using the word groom. I don't want to give this theory much energy except to say that it is harmful and it is a violation of a good and loving God, and very clearly pushed by a specific national group as a galvanizing cultural wedge in an attempt to amass power. Look no further. So I'm going to call out one of our own representatives. Mike Johnson, U.S. representative, this past week released a bill called the Stop the Sexualization of Children Act, I guess, where it forbids any sexually oriented programming under age 10, and it never defines what that is. But as an aside, a lot of the complaints towards the librarians were about who's going to watch the children if they check out these books. In an age of the internet, by the way, where we can have an internet-fueled insurrection in our country, there's a concern about which books children are going to check out. And there's a very interesting, this is the aside, abdication of parenting responsibilities as if government employees' job is to protect children from what books they're going to check out from the library. But I digress. They specifically pick books that are gender affirming, talk openly about sex, and they target books that they interpret to be encouraging children to experiment with gender. One of the examples is Juliana's a Mermaid. Now, I don't know how many of you have read this book. The premise is it's set in New Jersey, and this kid, Julian, sees all of these people dressed up like mermaids and wants to be one. And his grandmother says, well, after Julian tears up the house and makes a mermaid costume out of a curtain, which would be nuts. she, instead of getting mad, helps him dress up like a mermaid, and then they go to a mermaid-themed parade, which is like a thing they do in New Jersey. So I get it if you're in, I don't know, Montana or Arizona or something where you don't have parades, that you came up with this as a book to criticize. But in the greater New Orleans area, for a group of people to be upset that there is a book about a kid wanting to dress up in colorful clothes for a parade, says to me that these are national narratives that are not necessarily locally specific or authentically coming from a fear. But the question of fear is pronounced here. Untended fear is having real policy impacts. It always has. Untended fear is hurting real people. Now, I understand it. If you were raised in your life being told that you had to have a strict and rigid and restrictive gender idea, if you were told from a very young age to repress who you are, I'm not just talking about those who are eventually going to come out in their life, I'm talking just the whole spectrum of parts of who you are that are being told you need to be repressed. If you were told the threats of a child discovering the socially prescribed gender roles if you were being taught that children understanding that gender may be more complicated is somehow a threat to your own gender identity, that is a fear that needs to be tended. When people do not tend to their own spirit, do not do their own work, they tend to try to make other people do the work for them, often through policy. This country has been telling stories for generations about how scary black people and immigrants are. And we tell these stories to fend off real fears that come from acknowledging this country's treatment of black people and immigrants. And a lot of this is fueled by a misunderstanding of God. And I knew the Universalist would have an answer for me, so I dug back into the 17 and 1800s. And I want you to hear the words of Hosea Ballou. He was an old Universalist. He wrote this book called A Treatise on Atonement. I've never met a man who loved extra words more than him. So I tried to trim out the words to make this make sense. But he says, this is a treatise on atonement. So remember, Universalists are the idea that an all-loving God can never damn people forever to hell. Otherwise, it would disprove the idea of a loving God. So he says, now what are the consequences? Answer. One nation supposes itself only favored to God. Other people are haters of him and hated by him. He's also gendering God as he. If our God hates those who hate him, we ought to do as our God does and hate them too. One denomination of Christians has a different idea of the attributes of their God from another. They are violently opposed to each other. They are at sword point. They call each other heretics and doom each other to endless wrath of their God. All such religion is of the flesh. The wisdom of it is not from above, but it is earthly and devilish. And those who possess it are tormented day and night with it. If God be infinitely good, then God's goodness is commiserate with God's power and knowledge. Then all beings are objects of God's goodness. And to prove any being was destitute would prove that deity's knowledge did not comprehend such a being. Does that make sense? In other words, if you are going to go point out how wicked a child is for reading a book about a kid learning to be a mermaid, you are disproving God's goodness, according to Hosea Ballou. If God is unloving, if God allows people to be tortured, then it disproves the loving, benevolent God. If God is so minuscule as to create two very specific, American-centric, culturally driven, very modernly specific, 20th century media and corporate-driven understandings of gender, then God is no more powerful than Mattel or Coca-Cola or Ford. But this church has a broader understanding of God. An understanding of God so broad you don't have to believe in God. This understanding allows people to be their full selves. It allows us to look at our fear and to play with it. It gives us permission to enjoy being alive. And it gives us permission to laugh at memorial services because we need to do that. And it allows us to look at books and acknowledge the very real and ancient reality that there are multiple genders and multiple ways to consensually love, and it proves the broadness of God, not the narrow and constricting, limited view.
We are all dying. Our lives always moving toward completion. We need to learn to live with death and to understand that death is not the worst of all events. We need to fear not death, but life. Empty lives, loveless lives, lives that do not build upon the gifts that each of us has been given, lives that are like living deaths, lives which we never take the time to savor and appreciate, lives in which we never pause to breathe deeply. What we need to fear is not death, but squandering the lives we have been miraculously given. So let me die laughing, savoring one of life's crazy moments. Let me die holding the hand of the one I love and recalling that I tried to love and was loved in return. Let me die remembering that life has been good and that what I did, I could. But today, just remind me that I am dying so I can live, savor, and love with all my heart.
Real people have died. Real people have lived empty lives because the fear goes untended. They do not put skeletons on their lawn. They leave them tucked away in their closets. This is the church that must always be the church of sunshine. We have to be a church that trusts that no matter who you are, no matter how fearful or sad or addicted or angry, that you are just as holy the way you are. And we must be a church that knows that if we can go into the scary places, we can save real lives. Looking back at the lesson about the Sharps, they went into a very scary part of the world, and it cost them a lot of time with their family. I don't know what kind of trauma going through the experience they went through did. The symbol that the Unitarian Service Committee created, the symbol of a chalice, it was one that they used on stationery and documents to make them look more official. One of the books I read said, at a time where everything was chaos, anything that made you look official could save lives. They used that image in their effort to rescue people from real danger, from the Nazi regime, and more specifically, from an authoritarian regime that used division and took advantage of people's fears to perpetuate real violence against real people. As Unitarians and later Unitarian Universalists heard this story, they slowly, congregation by congregation, started adopting this as a symbol of our faith. This chalice is a promise that you are seen, that your fears can be tended, that we have an obligation to help bring this world towards justice and love, and that we will get there. Soon the day will arrive when we will no longer have to live in fear. And it is a promise that you do not need to be afraid of a constricting, punishing God. That is the theological imagination. The angry, punishing God is the theological imagination of the flesh, according to Ballou. Instead, our job is to allow ourselves to be okay being scared, to let other people care for us when we are afraid, to decorate our lawns in the scariest way you want to do, respectfully, to play with the things that we fear, to allow us to be human and to make sure that no person has to remain trapped under an angry, punishing God. And we don't do it alone. Amen. Let's go make it happen. I invite you to rise in body or spirit. Go out this week. Know that you are worthy of love. Go be at peace. Go make the world better.